All right, good afternoon. For those of you that are logging in, we're going to get started in about just a minute. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce's Veterans in Business virtual event. This is our inaugural virtual Veterans in Business event. We were hoping we would be able to bring this in person to you, but we're taking this virtual opportunity to bring some amazing veterans to you today that otherwise we may not have been able to have speak to our chamber group. The Veterans Committee is an authentic and powerful group that is committed to connecting and advancing veterans and their opportunities. We are so fortunate to have this committee founded and chaired by Marine Corps veteran Jim Birkhead, Director of Transportation and Risk for NSM Insurance, and our Vice Chair, Mike Lynch, who is a U.S. Army veteran and from Lynch Investments. So we want to thank you for your commitment to the Chamber and the business community in Delaware County. Now, as we all know, none of the Chamber programming is possible without the support of our sponsors. We'd now like to hear from our sponsors, and our first sponsor today is from Boeing, Andrew Builta, who is the Vice President and Program Manager from Boeing Boeing. Andrew?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to join you all today. I'm very excited about the discussion that we're going to have today. I am the Vice President and Program Manager for the Cargo and Utility Helicopter Division at Boeing, which here in Philadelphia at our Ridley Park site builds the Chinook as well as the MH-139 program for the United States Air Force. Long before that, though, I too was a veteran. I served on active duty in the Air Force for about 7 years before I was able to navigate my transition. So on active duty, I was a backseater in F-15s, had a great active duty career and transitioned into part-time service in the Air National Guard and retired last year after 20 years. Really excited about my ability to navigate that transition into Boeing. Obviously, active duty had primarily trained me how to drop precision guided munitions, which doesn't have a lot of civilian applications. So my time here at Boeing, I've been able to build an entirely new skill set that's resulted in me building helicopters for the Army of all things. So really excited to hear everybody else's testimonial and story about how we can help the 200,000 veterans a year that transition into civilian life. And certainly veterans are a big part of our workforce here at Boeing, and we certainly understand the value and the skills and everything that comes with hiring a veteran. So really excited to be hearing the dialogue today. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Andrew, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Now I'd like to turn it over to Christina Katsapis from Villanova University. She's the Manager of College Partnerships in the College of Professional Studies. Christina?
Thank you, Trish. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you today. I am not a veteran, but I'm proud to say that I am the daughter of a World War II vet, so naturally, hopefully fit in. Villanova University's College of Professional Studies is extremely grateful and proud to have partnered with the Chamber on today's event. Thank you to Trish, Jim, Jacqueline, the entire committee, and our distinguished panel for all your hard work in bringing it to life. I really look forward to hearing your experiences and your knowledge and your wisdom in this area and how we can help our ongoing military. Here at CPS, we offer a flexible and accelerated options for adult learners, catering to the military and veteran community, offering associates and bachelor degrees, credit-bearing certificates, and professional education options. Our programs are really designed to provide students with skills and knowledge necessary to help them reach their educational and professional goals. CPS can also partner with your organizations to offer and deliver tailored and strategic corporate training, workforce education, and professional development solutions in focused areas such as leadership, human resources, project management, business intelligence, and more. In partnership with our distinct faculty, we really are committed and focused on providing our students with a transformative, impactful, and successful learning experience. We invite you to learn more at our website, cps.villanova.edu. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity and your continued partnership. We look forward to being an educational partner and resource to support you, your organizations, and your families. Thank you again, and enjoy today's event.
Thank you so much, Christina. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jim Birkhead, who is our committee chair, as I mentioned, and will moderate the rest of this program this afternoon. Jim?
Awesome. Thanks, Trish. And the idea here is for myself, Ken, Brian, and Howard just have a roundtable discussion, talk about some leadership and business topics, and also veteran transition, and take it from there. Their bio is pretty readily available on the information the Chamber had sent out previously, also a quick Google, but I think you'll find a very good cross-section of private sector and military experience between myself, Ken, Brian, and Howard, Army, Navy, Marines, different industries in the private sector. So our goal for today is just to really give, hopefully, everyone that is logged in 1 or 2 takeaways to help them in their, build a successful career, whatever they may be doing right now. So, so hopefully it's a nugget, it's a story, it's an example, it's something you can tuck away and help to build yourself, because really what we're trying to do is build bridges and connect people. And on that note, I do want to thank Villanova and Boeing. When you look at, putting your money where your mouth is locally in regards to bridging that gap, that veteran transition gap, and also just the veteran private sector connection, those two are awesome. They're as good as it gets. So let's just jump into it now. And, Ken, Brian, Howard, obviously the last few months have been pretty interesting. I think for a lot of professionals, they've been making decisions on the fly. They've been making decisions under pressure. They've been, just taking it day by day. And I think, your experience in the military is somewhere where that is relatively common, right? You're making pretty quick decisions. You're making them on the fly. And you're making them under pressure where really lives depend on it. So are there any specific situations, any specific, skills that you've seen that have helped you navigate a pretty chaotic leadership environment?
Okay, I'll jump in there first, Jim. One thing when you talk about working in a chaotic environment, I think it's really important that it's that preparation that you take before you actually enter into that environment. And that comes to training, and something that's universal, absolutely universal across the services. The Marine Corps doesn't have a corner on it, although we always like to think we do. But it's leadership, teamwork, and trust. And those elements are inculcated into service members from the time they step on those yellow footprints or they go to officer candidate school, is really instilling that leadership, teamwork, and trust. And when I talk leadership, it's not just the guy at the top. It's empowering your subordinates, empowering your NCOs and your staff NCOs to be able to make decisions. And that in turn results in the teamwork, the team mentality, laying that foundation for any good organization, any great organization, that foundation of trust. And when you can have all those elements working together, when you do enter that chaotic environment, and my background, I've had over 30 years on active duty, 10 deployments, 7 of those into combat theaters. I really got to see over the years of how those elements working together can get you through those hard times, can get you through that adversity, can get you through that chaos, because you have confidence in the team you're working with. You have confidence in your training. And that's really what I take away. I don't have any, I have 100 C stories, but not one particular story, but more the theme of leadership, teamwork, and trust being those elements that are in service members' DNA that will help any organization outside in any industry.
That's awesome. Thank you. Howard, Brian, anything you guys want to add on to that?
Yeah, Jim, I would add on to that communications. We went into this pandemic. I have a small business, about 25 employees, some contractors that work for us, and connected to them are family members. So we felt it was very important to communicate more frequently, especially in somewhat of a virtual environment, and to communicate both ways. As I like to say, 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen twice as much as you speak. So really communicating to employees, listening to their concerns, modifying our work environment to make them comfortable, make them safe, but continue to get the mission done. So that would be my 2 cents on that, is just really effective communications, transparency, and letting everybody know, the entire situation so they can make decisions too.
Right.
The only thing I would add to that is in a chaotic situation, always remember that there's a plan. In the Navy, we have a 15, 20, 30-year shipbuilding plan. Things stretch out for a long time. And there's also short-term plans, and all small businesses have those plans. And even in my civilian job, which is a financial planner, just obviously around the election, people get spooked, and I always have to remind them, what is your long-term plan? So I would say that when folks are making those chaotic decisions under pressure, realize and always fall back on your training, and remember, there is a plan. Everybody has a plan. And if the decision at the time doesn't reflect or affect the plan, then just evaluate if it's necessary or not.
That's awesome. Guys, appreciate it. Only thing I add on to that, kind of, I think, taking a couple of your points and combine them to a degree, empowerment communication, I think that's key. And also, I think just being real about what you're looking at. And I think, sugarcoating it or making it seem less, you might help yourself in the short term by making yourself feel better about something, but you're really not helping yourself in the long term. And I think to what some of what Ken was saying too, would always help me, in combat operations, was just, knowledge kills fear. And the more you understand about what the enemy is doing, the more you understand about what you're up against, I think the more comfortable you become with decisions that you have to make. I think, there are no boogeymen. There is nothing out there that's unbeatable, but you really have to burrow in. You really have to learn as much as you can about the environment that you're in. So right now, your industry, the recession, the coronavirus, just learn as much as you can, and that'll, enable you to make better decisions. So that was awesome, guys. Thank you for that. Moving on, somewhat similar topic, a little bit different. So obviously, hey, we're a little bit what we're talking about is that private sector and military, connection and or divide. So have you seen, and I think all three, you have different levels of experience in the military and in the private sector. Have you seen any real big correlations or differences between leadership in the military versus leadership in the private sector? Anything that you see, what leadership is leadership? It's very similar. There aren't many differences. Or, hey, I've seen very different styles execute leadership decisions. And not saying one's better than the other, but just can you guys walk us through that a little bit? Because that's something I find fascinating, just having been on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, I can start off, Jim. Is that okay? Yeah, I'll jump in first. So my business is, as I mentioned earlier, a small business. Started about 18 years ago. So we're very entrepreneurial, and it's very different than what I experienced in the military. In the military, I was in the Army Corps of Engineers, large structure, lots of rules, lots of organization. And in the entrepreneurial world, you have to be nimble, you have to be adaptive, and so it's very conducive to veterans. They're used to being out there, maybe in small units or as small unit leaders, and they have to make decisions within a framework, but they own that decision. And I think that whole concept of ownership of your decisions, of ownership of the responsibility of the men and women that you lead, and the completion of the mission translates very well into business. You have responsibility, for the people who work for you. You have a responsibility to people who are above you in a business organization, much like you did in the military. And I think the military veteran has that sense of ownership, which is unique in our world today. And that's something that translates very well into business and is really a huge advantage for veterans in business.
Well said. Well said.
And I would say, I really want to believe that leadership transcends, there's not a distinct line between military leadership and private sector leadership. Good leadership is good leadership. Great leadership is great leadership. And a lot of that comes from, you're going to have different leadership styles, obviously. But I think a misnomer a lot of times in the civilian sector with someone that's not familiar with the military thinks of the military as very rigid and very, bark orders, you follow the orders, you don't. That has not been my experience in the Marine Corps. I mean, my experience in the Marine Corps has been really developing young Marines and sailors to be flexible, adaptable, responsive, being able to, I think Howard put it well, communication is key. And really when that individual Marine or sailor understands the why behind the intent or the why behind the order, it makes it a hell of a lot easier to carry out because you have more awareness. And, I would say that there's going back to the question, that there's not a distinct difference between the two. I think when you see it, when you see great leadership, you know.
And I think it's funny, to your point, you guys have both touched on young, sailors, airmen, Marines. It's one thing I do run into, and I think this goes along the lines of what you were saying too, Ken, for, someone coming out of the military, coming out of a rigid environment, leadership is pushed down to a large degree to younger people in the military. And I think that they come out very prepared because they're making, life and decisions, or they're handling millions of dollars of equipment on a daily basis in the military at a young age. And I think when you talk about communication, when you talk about showing them the whole picture, it's something that I do see, I think, is missed a little bit when you look at the private sector, and that, it's a 24-year-old college grad. They may not be able to see the whole picture. They may not get it. I think give it to them, show them the whole picture, because the more they're bought in, the more they understand, the better they're going to be able to perform. And I think you're going to be surprised at what they're able to handle and how that is going to motivate them. So I think there's a couple great points. Brian, anything you want to jump in that?
Yeah, I just want to go back to something Colonel DeTrue said, and that was that obviously young folks in the military are adaptable, and they do push decisions down to the lowest level. One of the things that I actually struggled with a lot in my transition was all the rigidity gone. And what I mean by that is, still to this day, I'm someone who, and I know all the guys who served are going to laugh, alarm goes off at 5:30. Breakfast is at 7. My shoes are tied by 7:30. And I have still struggled with kind of like this inshallah, laissez-faire, and it's not all business, but specifically my field, where it's like, maybe we'll grab lunch between like 11:45, and I'll give you a call sometime between 1 and 1:30. I struggle mightily with that. So for those businesses out there who are considering hiring veterans, just consider that there's an aspect to the rigidity of military life that I think can benefit you. And that would be that they're always going to be on time. If you ask them to be somewhere, they'll be there. One of the greatest things I ever learned from one of my instructors at Auburn University was anybody can be successful in anything as long as they're on time. And that stuck with me. So yes, we're trained to be adaptable and overcome things and leadership at the lowest level, but there are aspects that remain with us that I think are beneficial in the civilian side and should be leaned on and utilized if possible.
That's an awesome segue. Thank you, Brian. Into the next topic I want to jump into, specifically veteran transition. What have you guys seen that companies are doing well or maybe not well, and then vice versa, because it's incumbent upon the veteran too. What do you think? What do we seen veterans really succeed at, and or maybe use a little work? And again, these are general questions, but in the concept of the veteran transition, from your experience, what you guys have seen.
I'll defer to Howard on this one to start. I kind of feel, just in my experience, I still feel I'm in transition. I retired in the fall of 2018, and I don't know if I have a lot of examples of that. So I'll defer and jump in as things come up.
And I'll just kind of narrow it down a little bit. The reason I threw this question in there is I think you hear a lot. I think a lot of business owners, a lot of people want to, quote unquote, help veterans. They want to get involved. They want to be that pathway. They want to be that bridge to success. But maybe, how do we help them get there? What can they expect when working with veterans? So I think that's, part of where I wanted to go with this question. So sorry, Howard, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. No, I actually hope a lot to say, hopefully a little to contribute, because it's a very important question. It's really the reason some of us are here. And so, a lot of thoughts about it. The military veteran, in addition to all the other characteristics that we talk about, is very resilient. And I think that's something that works very well, when they're in the hiring process and when they're onboarding themselves. I participate in an organization called Veterans in Energy. It's actually a group that tries to pull together ERGs within large electric utility companies. And I think those are very good initiatives to help transition veterans into large organizations, small organizations in a particular sector that's very conducive to the military veteran. What I would say, though, is that sometimes you see people maybe becoming too involved in those veterans organizations, and they identify too strongly with veterans in a large organization, and they need to make sure that they reach out and bridge into the civilian world and understand, those aspects of the business that they work for, so they truly integrate themselves into that business. Maybe at a micro level, from an individual level, I think this is good advice for veterans, and for anyone in particular. If you're looking for a job, you're interviewing that employer. Okay, don't go in there, hat in hand, hoping to get this job. You really want to assess: can you be successful in this organization? Is this an organization that you're going to want to work for? So you really have to go in there with the mindset of, hey, I have a lot of skills to offer. I want to be choosy as to who I offer those skills to, and learn a lot about the organization, ask a lot of questions, and interview them, and be confident that you've got so much to offer that, if these guys aren't your choice, maybe the next group is. So rambled around there a little bit, but I want to touch on, kind of some of those key points.
It's a big world out there, right? And
Yep.
Don't just jump with the first thing that comes your way.
That's right.
You think that's what you're limiting yourself to. So, Brian, Ken, anything else you want to throw in there?
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'll just add, something that came to mind as Howard was talking is one thing that I've seen, and this is really directed as employers to employers, and that's, creating better awareness of the veteran community, because the veteran community is diverse. I mean, it's a whole lot of series type models when we talk veterans, and I think there's a tendency sometimes just to paint veterans with one brush. And I think there's a difference between a young E3 to E7 transitioning out of the service, or a junior officer transitioning out of the service, or even a senior officer transitioning out of the service. I think knowing some of those nuances to the demographic, and not just painting them with, one single brush of, I want to help veterans. I think it helps to have venues like this to build that awareness of what the veteran community has to offer, and what that demographic of the veteran community is made up of. Just an observation. And I think, I don't know if that makes sense to anybody. It makes sense to me, just having, been observing it over the past few years. But I think that's one thing, just building awareness, especially if you don't have a whole lot of awareness of the military, just educating yourself and understanding some of those dynamics.
But I think
because the needs are different. The needs for all those types of veterans are different.
Yeah, and you can micro target. And I think to what Howard was saying too is, he's an engineering business, building relationships, and/or figuring out what aspects of the military that you need to be targeting to develop a pipeline to make those connections, to get those types of individuals into your organization, or connect them with other people in your world. To your point, Ken, you have infantrymen, you have helicopter maintenance, you have computer programmer, you have a wide variety of jobs and skill sets within the military. So figuring out where do you want to, is it junior officers getting out? Are you more of a senior officer type of thing? So I think, doing your homework and understanding the military a little better can help you connect you with the right people in the right places. So, Brian, anything you want to add?
Yeah, when we were talking about this question previously, the biggest thing that came to my mind was work-life balance. So I'm still a reservist. I spent 10 years on active duty. I've been in the reserve now for 4 years, so I'm kind of still in transition, right? I have a few more years to go till retirement. But one of the things that was top of the line when I got off active duty was a career that would allow me to make my own hours. And that's because work-life balance meant a lot to me. So when we're in the military, right, we're on a 9 to 12-month deployment. Specifically in the Navy, we have to sleep on the ship every handful of days. We're at to sea a lot. So work-life balance is something you typically don't get in the military. And I think a lot of transitioning veterans are looking for that work-life balance as they move into the civilian sector. And if you move into a civilian job where it's 9 to 5, but then at 5:30 when you're at home eating dinner with the family and kids, your phone's blowing up because the boss needs something, and then you're checking email at 6:30, and there's a phone call later in the evening. That work-life balance that the veteran might be seeking out could potentially go out of the window. And I have a few friends that have experienced that in their first few jobs as they transitioned out years ago. And I think civilian employers understanding the background of the veteran and pushing to know how important the work-life balance is for them is a positive and will give you the most out of those veterans that you potentially bring into your organization.
That's well said, spot on. I've seen the same thing in a couple of different ways. So that's a great point, Brian. Thank you. Only thing I jump on that to add is, I don't think you can compare yourself to your peers, and that, the year you graduated high school or college, you have had a different life experience. You are starting in the private sector or business world a little bit later than everybody else. You have some skill sets they do not have, some life experiences, your peers do not have, but they have a head start and they have some skill set that you do not have. And so you can't just look at it apples to oranges. You have to, I think, look at yourself as a unique case. This really applies to everybody and everything. But, what's your story? Where are you going with it? What are you doing with yourself? And you can't get lost in the sauce a little bit, kind of looking around you. So something I've run into. So now we're going to step away from, kind of the veteran transition conversation a little bit, just to get back into leadership. And this is something that I do have this in here for a specific reason. What is the hardest decision you've ever made as a leader, and what were the results of that decision?
Once again, I'll go back to not one single decision, but in environments that I've operated in, specifically when we were in Iraq, Jim, in the 2007 timeframe, very kinetic. I think the hardest decisions were making that daily risk assessment, doing the risk assessment every day and what is that acceptable level of risk. And I think at time, as much as we try to get it right, it's high stakes. And there's days that you may, the enemy has a vote, just like I guess in business, your competitor has a vote. But in combat, and I don't really think you can compare the two, it was my hardest challenge was, putting those young Marines and sailors, those guys and gals in harm's way. And we weren't always, sometimes we took a bloody nose. And that's, I would say the hardest thing in my military career was just operating in that environment multiple times and having that kind of burden of decisions to make at that level.
Yeah, and I think it's something that, be it you're a business owner, you're managing people, or you're in combat, I think that has applicability across the board, because, in the business world, you have to make some hard decisions that do affect livelihoods, that could affect your family's livelihood, your livelihood. And so, I think that's something that as a leader, you are almost constantly put in that position to have to make decisions. Some of them are pretty hard. Brian, Howard, anything you guys want to jump in there?
Yeah, Brian, go ahead. I maybe one thing to add, but if you want to go jump in.
So it's actually quite interesting, following up on what James just said about affecting people's livelihoods. Kind of like what Colonel Dutroux said, I don't know if there's a singular decision, but there's two specific ones that jumped out to me when James was talking. And they revolve in this military term, specifically in the Navy, revolves around gun decking. And that is something where you account in an official logbook that something has been done when in fact it didn't. And I was stationed in Japan in 2009 on a minesweep. And the way minesweep is built, it's actually built out of Christmas trees. It's built out of Douglas fir, so it doesn't set off a magnetically charged mine in the ocean. And there's a gigantic hole in the center of the ship where a mine hunting radar drops down through the bottom of it to search for mines. And this radar, this sonar is very sensitive, and there are folks that operate around it as it's moving in and out. And if the maintenance isn't done on it properly, it could potentially take someone's arm off or malfunction. And I had a chief who had been in the Navy 22 years who I found out that the maintenance on it was supposed to be done, a very critical maintenance piece that took a few days. It wasn't done. He signed off that it had been done. And I was a young lieutenant junior grade, 23 years old. And it was tough, but I had no choice but to turn him into the skipper, potentially affecting his paycheck, his retirement, knowing that the actions he took were deliberate and could have resulted in the loss of life of some of the sailors going forward. So as James said, those kind of decisions are extremely difficult, but you have to do the right thing for everybody's safety and the future seaworthiness of the vessel.
Yeah, Jim, the only thing I might add to that, appreciative certainly of in the military, it can be life or death, and sometimes actually is, and generally not the case in the civilian world. But the tough decisions are always I think in the civilian world associated with personnel, right? Hiring and firing, which is traumatic for everyone, to include the person and the family affected. And I think understanding that there's usually a family behind your employees is really important to understand anytime you're going through that. I would say that most of the time you have difficult personnel decisions to make in the civilian world anyway. It's usually in both parties' best interest. There's just not a good fit. Someone's not performing well, maybe through, despite all the good intentions. So I think just having the best interest of both parties in mind, matters. Having just been through the pandemic, where a lot of companies had to make a lot of decisions to cut staff and payroll, there is the big picture of the enterprise has to continue, right? The business has to continue forward, and sometimes you have to make those difficult decisions so that the business itself survives for those who remain to fight another day, so to speak, in the commercial world.
And I think what you're talking about, Howard, is it's something that really truly is in the best interest of the organization and for everybody involved. And I think sometimes that person may realize that after the fact if they haven't realized that already. So, provided that situation is what it is. Great points. Hey, Andrew, is there anything you want to jump in on in regards to this conversation? I know you have a pretty good wealth of experience too. So. No,
this is a fascinating discussion. I have, because I, served in the Guard while I was working through my career at Boeing, I often got calls from folks that were transitioned out of active duty, that my buddies, and one of the discussions I always have with them is trying to make sure they understand the difference between character trait or a behavior and a skill. Because in a lot of cases, the employers don't provide enough value to the behaviors and discipline that we talked about earlier that veterans would bring to that equation. And on the flip side, the veterans need to understand, hey, there's certain skills here. In some cases, veterans are often, I know I was guilty of this, I was not creative enough in how I could transition my skills into a civilian employment. So my first job at Boeing was doing aircrew training, which was essentially what I was doing on active duty. Now that became a stepping stone to a series of other opportunities throughout the company, and I became less and less of that F-15 guy as my skills built. But I think on the hiring side, employers definitely undervalue the behaviors and characteristics that a veteran brings. On the flip side, veterans need to think through, how do I leverage the skills I have, or where do I recognize that I need to put more value in the behaviors that I bring to the table? One of the examples I gave is, one of my veteran buddies that was transitioning, he was a wing commander, so he was, had 5,000 people under his command, and, was worth billions of dollars, right? And you could tell in his transition, he was looking for a level across type level of responsibility. And I said, boy, you need to think about, yeah, you had a lot of responsibility and you've got great leadership skills, but we need to talk about the skills and what skills do you have that could be applied to an organization? Because in some cases, my counter to him was, hey, I've got great leadership skills. Can I be an F-22 squadron commander? Well, he's like, well, no, you're not an F-22 pilot. I said, okay. So it's a balance between that behaviors and discipline and the skills, and how do you find that right fit? And I absolutely agree, when a veteran goes to interview for that opportunity, it's all about the veteran interviewing the organization to see if it would be a good fit for them. But that's one of the discussions I have with a lot of folks as they're transitioning. How do you manage and market your behaviors and your discipline that you bring from a veteran's perspective, while also recognizing you're looking for opportunities to build new and different skills?
That's awesome. Well said. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up with one more question. I know everyone's busy. Everyone has a lot going on. Really appreciate everyone's time. Wrap up with a final question. We'll see if there's any questions for us, and then we'll call it a day. And the final question that I have is, are there any specific mentors and or, be it like a historical leader? Is there someone that you really look up to as a role model that's really influenced you and your leadership style, or maybe a specific kind of, that aha moment where a leader did something or you had an incident that has really affected you and shaped your perspective of leadership?
Yeah, James, I think, I was blessed to have a lot of great mentors along the way, and I served in a lot of different organizations. So I took the examples of both good leadership and bad leadership and tried to, develop my own leadership style. And I think that was very helpful along the way. But I think one thing that I really learned early in the Marine Corps, and I think you'll be able to, identify with this, is my first platoon sergeant as a young lieutenant was probably the most critical guy in my early development. That I understood that he had a good 12, 15 years more than I did in the Marine Corps. And there's, like Howard said, you have 2 ears for a reason, two ears and one mouth for a reason. And I think early on that platoon sergeant was critical in my development for really understanding the organization and knowing, how to utilize and leverage his leadership in order to develop my own leadership. And I think that was something that you walk away with is sometimes you have to be a good follower in order to develop into a good leader, and you do that throughout your military career.
It's funny. I would say very similar to you. For me, it was two guys I would say were my first squad leaders, my first deployment in Fallujah, who took the time. They're like, hey, we're not going to be here. You're next deployment. You're going to be running the show. To walk through, to explain, to show why they're doing things, to make me do it myself. So then when we went back over, I was much more prepared to step into that role. And the two guys I work for now are, stopped by the CEO and the president. Hey, this is why we're doing this. This is why we're doing that. This is the higher level stuff. Just so you're seeing that and learning that. And I think a lot of that comes back to mentorship as well too. For people who have come out on the other side, just finding people that they can influence, that they can share their experience with. So Andrew, Brian, Ken, want to touch on that? Or?
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that too, because I think it's a good point that I wanted to make to people transitioning. And Andrew touched on it a little bit when he spoke about it too. So I'll use a civilian mentor. When I left active duty from the military, I went to work for my first civilian job. And I guess the president of the company took an interest in me because maybe I was enthusiastic, maybe he liked the military aspect of it. But he mentored me on the language of business and the business's financial statement and how it all works. And that was his mentoring of me, and that really helped me develop an understanding of the language of business. We have our military acronyms, we still use them, but there's plenty of business knowledge and skill and language that you really have to understand. So having all those great characteristics coming out of the military as a veteran, your resilience, your flexibility. I like what Brian said, you show up on time, which as many of us know, you can't train that. But understanding the language of business and understanding the key metrics in a business, whether they're financial or customer service, are very important for transitioning veterans to understand.
I think,
and I had a mentor teach me all that, so that was nice.
But I think the language of business is a very good way to say that, because it is, you are coming into a different world, and I think you can understand it. I couldn't say it better than that. The language of business, that is, I think, one of the steepest learning curves to a veteran coming out, and just understanding that dynamic to it. Brian, was that Brian was going to say something?
Yeah. I just had one thing real quick. I would never in my life consider this gentleman a mentor. He was my second executive officer on the good ship USS Gettysburg, which was a cruiser. give you an example. His first child was born. I'll never forget this. On a Wednesday morning at 9:02 a.m., the captain came on and announced that everybody was happy for him. About 40 minutes later, ding, 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 commander arriving. He was back on the ship 40 minutes after his first child was born. And that goes back to the work-life balance thing. I don't think that he had that, and that's something I observed. But there's one thing he routinely said, which has stuck with me since I was a young 21-year-old ensign, and that was, if you set your standards higher than your boss, you are working for yourself. And I dislike 99% of the things this guy did. But that one quote, I have never, ever forgotten it. And it has helped me raise my standard in each stepping stone of my career, whether it's in the military or the private sector. Keep your standards higher than your bosses, and you're working for yourself, and you'll be successful.
Well said. Well said. I definitely agree with that. So thank you guys. I think some great perspectives. Thank you for opening up a little bit, sharing your experiences. From what I've seen, we have two questions. One of them is from Chris Rojas, who I was actually in Fallujah with way back in the day. I believe he served with Ken on a special MAGTAF. A few years after that, he's an active duty gunnery sergeant who will be transitioning out next year. And he is asking, and by the way, great Marine, I would say, Rojas, you're probably the epitome of what a Marine NCO should be, personnel staff NCO. But he's asking, once you transition out, have you encountered any type of a bias or anything where people, think you're going to be crazy and or, too intense or anything like that once you've hit the business world? Have you guys ever run into that? And or if you have, what's the best way to deal with that? I have not. I've had some relatively awkward experiences. I haven't had anything, I think, that intense where people, had a true bias against you. I think a lot of it is having a conversation, and I think a lot of it is, just sharing knowledge and just spending time. Obviously, Andrew, I think your company like Boeing is very well accustomed to hiring and working with veterans. So a lot of that probably depends on where you end up to and the type of company that you're working for, the industry that you're working in. Anyone want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think I go back to my painting veterans with one brush. That's a danger we can run into. And it's been my experience. I never experienced bias or any kind of conflict. But I do think if you don't have that awareness of veterans, some folks can focus too heavily on the broken veteran, can focus too heavily on the 22 suicides a day, can focus too heavily on PTSD, those types of things that there's more to veterans than some of those issues that exist. And I think there is, in some of my experiences, there was a heavy focus on that negative aspect of the veteran in what they might be dealing with. Sympathetic, not critical of, but I think it's real important to know that, veterans are more than some of those pretty heavy issues that are out there impacting the veteran community or a portion of the veteran community. So I have seen it, but like I say, it's not intended bias. I think it's the lack of awareness. And I think by having venues like this, you learn, more and more of what the veteran community is actually comprised of.
Ken, maybe part of what you may see is the lack of skills. And I don't mean that in a harsh manner, but, if you're an Army infantry soldier, your skills they don't translate real well into the civilian world unless you're in law enforcement or something like that. So I think the employer is hiring you because of the great characteristics you bring but not necessarily your skills. So again, you have to look for the right fit, the employer that's going to value all you bring, and the fact, as Andrew said earlier, hey, over the course of a couple of years, I developed some great skills, and when those skills and my leadership and character merged, it really helped my career take off. So, look for those organizations that will be able to help you gain those skills, maybe even have a little patience with you as you develop, because in the long term, you're going to be a great asset for that organization.
I laughed when Brian talked about, still having a set schedule. So if I'm not backing into my parking spot at the factory here at 5:38 every morning, I'm doing a whole root cause corrective action on what happened, and it's for a first shift that starts at 6. That is not a skill or a behavior that is easily taught. I'm in my office. I've been here 20 minutes. I'm on my third cup of coffee, and I see people scurrying in at 5 after 6 to catch, their first shift. So yeah, there's a tremendous amount of value that you get from hiring a veteran, because there are some things and behaviors and characteristics and traits that you just can't teach easily. My view is, my 14 years at Boeing, I don't think I've ever had a meeting here where there wasn't a veteran in every meeting. So you can look around the room and tell who you can count on, who you can trust. I think it's just important to realize, hey, some of these, like the mechanics, the language of business, the processes, I can teach all of that to somebody who's here on time, just as we were talking about earlier.
Awesome. We have 2 more questions. We're going to kind of combine them. Walter Hartnett is asking, what do you think is the biggest obstacle in the veteran-employer divide? And then, what is the one thing employees can do to bridge that gap? And then Michael Brown, who runs the Veterans Program at Villanova, does a great job, is asking, what advice do you give a business looking to hire more veterans? And what advice do you give a young enlisted veteran starting to make that transition to the civilian world? So to kind of boil that down, 1, what advice would you give to employers looking to hire veterans? And then 2, that young enlisted veteran looking to transition, what advice would you give him?
Jim, I can start off because I wanted to comment on another. I think Vince Gordon made a comment about what industries they're in. I mentioned earlier I participate in an organization called Veterans in Energy, and energy is the energy sector. Think of it as the electric utility industry. So here in Philadelphia, it's PECO, Exelon, those organizations, and those organizations are reaching out to veterans because they know that their kinetic environment. They're outside. They have to respond to local and national emergencies. So the skill set that the veterans bring, the characters that they bring, are very good in that industry, and that's a very long-term focused industry. So they are willing and able to help you gain those skills over time. So I like the electric utility industry and the suppliers into it, major manufacturers like Siemens and General Electric. And it's a great place to look because they value the veteran, they're looking for veterans, and it's a place where veterans, I think, could be very comfortable in an organization like an electric utility company. And I think, Jim has my contact information, so if anyone's interested in pursuing that, I'll get you connected to that Veterans in Energy outreach program.
Awesome.
I think to answer Mike Brown's, as far as, what you tell a business hiring veterans is how trainable young service member is, that they're trainable, and like you all said, they will be on time at the right place and in the right uniform, and that's 90% of it. And, that 10% is that ability to take that individual under the wing and be trainable. And they'll do great things for you.
And then I'll touch on the second part of that question, and I think we'll wrap up. Advice for young enlisted veteran, again, what I would say, I was relatively young when I got out. I was enlisted. Don't limit yourself. I think that's something that I definitely see in that, yes, you were enlisted. Frequently, that means you did not go to college. And I think that there's, a variety of factors that play into that. Do not limit yourself in what you think that you can do and that you have the GI Bill at your disposal. Most likely, you have a variety of other tools, and you have a lot of people who do want to help you. So don't sell yourself short. In that school like Villanova, a company like Boeing, there are some great institutions and great organizations out there that you can get involved in. So, your service in the military gets you up here. Some of these organizations and people can help you get to the next level. And when you combine, your experiences in the military, when you combine, I think a lot of the initiative that brought you into the military in the first place with these other factors that are out there to help you, really, you can do almost anything. So that's how I would answer that. And then I think we do have everyone's contact information. So that's been, as Howard mentioned, some of the activities he's involved in. If anyone is interested in touching base with any of us, Chambers or contact information. It's been on the information that we have been sending out. So please reach out. I'm more than happy to continue dialogue. That's why we are doing this, to connect people with a like mind who believe in certain things, who really want to help veterans and also just help their communities. So that's why we're here. Please reach out and let's see what else we can get going in the area and then outside the area as well. So anything else? Any thoughts, comments, questions?
I do, James, I do see one question here on what role higher education can play in the transition into the private sector. And I would just, for me, I was, like I said, 30 years in the Marine Corps. In my last 3 years, I went back to get my master's in public administration. I had a master's from the War College in strategic studies. But I knew at that point when I was transitioning that I really had to, for lack of a better description, civilianize my lexicon. I don't think I used one acronym during this presentation, but it's important, I think, to whether it may not have to be a degree granting program, but it can be specializing in certifications and things like that, to be able to really update your currency in, like Howard said, understanding the business terms and principles, what a P&L is, what this is, that, I think it's important. That's one way, and especially the College of Professional Studies has a multitude of avenues to be able to take to do just that, is really bring you up to currency in your education and not be, the master of 1,000 acronyms, to be able to speak current, vocabulary for the business world.
To adapt to the new world, to adapt your language and your outlook. So awesome. Great points all. Thank you so much for everyone who participated. Thank you so much for everyone who attended, and hopefully we can get some good things going out of this, some good connections made, and keep rolling. So thank you. Good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Great job.